She was sold to an Apache at 18, but became the love he could never let go. Emma grew up in a quiet village surrounded by hills and rivers. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and life moved slowly. The morning smelled of fresh bread from the small bakery near the square, and the afternoons were filled with the laughter of children running barefoot through dusty lanes. Emma loved her village. She loved the warm sun on her face, the scent of wildflowers that grew along the riverbank, and the soft whispers of the wind through the tall trees. But as much as she loved her home, she knew life was not easy for her family. Her father, a hardworking man, spent long hours in the fields, his hands rough and cracked from years of labor. He tried to make sure Emma and her younger brother had enough to eat, but money was always tight. Her mother sewed clothes for neighbors and mended old garments to help pay for the bills. Emma often helped, running errands or carrying water from the village well, but she also dreamed of a life beyond her small home. She dreamed of seeing new places, of learning things the village had never offered. She wanted to read books filled with adventures, meet people from faraway towns, and perhaps even make a name for herself. Emma's 18th birthday had passed just a few weeks ago. She had celebrated quietly with her family, but deep inside, she felt the pull of something bigger. She wanted to explore, to find freedom, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. Her parents depended on her in ways they did not even express. The truth was, Emma's family was poor, and that made them vulnerable. She had heard stories of people from neighboring towns being tricked or taken advantage of, and though she tried not to think about it, a part of her always feared that such a thing could happen to her. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, a man arrived in the village. He was tall, with a smooth, confident voice and eyes that seemed to study everything carefully. He carried himself as someone important, someone who knew how the world worked. At first, people welcomed him politely, curious about who he was and what he wanted. Emma noticed him too, watching from the doorway of her home. There was something in his presence that made her uneasy, though she could not say why. The man introduced himself as a trader, someone who could provide opportunities to hardworking families like hers. He spoke of jobs, of money, of better futures. He praised the skills of Emma's mother in sewing and the diligence of her father in the fields. Then, he turned his attention to Emma. He spoke softly, almost kindly, about her intelligence, her potential, and the bright future she could have if she went with him to a place where she could learn and grow. He painted a picture of a life full of excitement and new experiences, far away from the village. Emma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was her chance, the opportunity she had been dreaming about. But she also felt a knot of fear in her stomach. Something in the way he spoke made her uneasy, a subtle edge in his words that hinted at control rather than freedom. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this man could offer the life she dreamed of, but deep inside, a quiet voice warned her to be careful. Her parents, worn out by years of struggle, were tempted. The man promised them money in exchange for Emma's journey, insisting that it would only be temporary and that she would return with skills and knowledge that could change their lives forever. They hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. They loved Emma dearly, and the thought of letting her go was unbearable, yet the promise of a better future for the family weighed heavily on their hearts. Emma felt torn. She had always listened to her parents, had always obeyed their wishes, but now she faced a choice she could not easily make. She wanted to chase her dreams, yet she did not want to leave her family vulnerable. That night she lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the life she wanted and the life that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Her heart ached with uncertainty, and sleep came only in short, restless bursts. The next morning the man returned. He had brought papers, contracts, and promises. He spoke with a confidence that seemed to push her parents toward a decision. Emma watched quietly as her parents signed documents she did not fully understand. She realized with a growing sense of dread that this was no longer a simple opportunity. Something had shifted. The man smiled, assuring them that everything would be fine, that Emma would be safe, and that she would return to them with new skills and knowledge. Before she could protest, she was told to prepare for the journey. Her mind raced with fear and confusion. She packed her belongings quickly, taking only what she could carry, and clutched a small locket her mother had given her. Inside was a picture of her family, a reminder of home, of love, and of the life she hoped to return to. The journey itself was frightening. Emma traveled with the man and a few companions she did not know. The landscape changed as they moved away from her village. Lush fields gave way to rocky paths, rivers turned into dry streams, and the familiar sights of home disappeared behind her. Emma's heart pounded with every mile, her mind filled with questions she did not dare to speak aloud. Where was she going? Who would she meet? What awaited her at the end of this journey? When they arrived at the settlement, Emma realized the truth she had been too afraid to face. She was not going to a place of learning or opportunity. She had been sold to a different life, one she had never imagined. The people there spoke a language she did not understand, lived by rules she had never known, and looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. Among them was a man named Tay, an Apache leader. He was strong, his presence commanding, and his eyes held a seriousness that both intimidated and intrigued her. Emma's fear intensified, but so did a strange sense of wonder. She was in a world so different from her own. The customs, the land, the people, all of it was foreign, yet there was a beauty in it she could not ignore. The sky stretched wider here, the mountains taller and the air cleaner. Even in fear, she could not help but notice the small details, the patterns in the clothing, the way the children played, the rhythm of daily life that seemed both strict and natural. The first days were the hardest. Emma struggled with simple tasks, could not communicate her thoughts, and felt the weight of isolation pressing down on her. She missed her family desperately, clinging to the hope that one day she might return. Yet she also noticed Tay watching her carefully, never harsh, never cruel, but always alert. There was a discipline in him, a strength she could not yet understand. He provided food, ensured she had shelter, and guided her through the unfamiliar routines of the tribe. Emma's emotions were a storm. Fear, sadness, and anger often overwhelmed her, yet small moments of kindness from Tay made her question everything she thought she knew about him. He never forced her beyond what she could handle, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to observe him differently. Perhaps he was not a captor in the way she had imagined. Perhaps he, too, carried burdens, responsibilities, and emotions that were hidden behind a strong exterior. She learned to sleep in the lodge, to eat the food prepared by the women of the tribe, and to follow the rhythms of their daily life. Each day was a challenge, but also a lesson. She discovered that survival required patience, observation, and humility. And though she could not speak their language yet, she learned to communicate in small ways, gestures, expressions, and actions that conveyed respect and understanding. By the end of the first month, Emma was no longer completely lost in this new world. She had learned basic routines, recognized faces, and began to understand the tribe's ways. Yet her heart still ached for her home, her parents, and the life she had been torn from. The nights were the hardest. When the campfire flickered low and everyone else slept, Emma often sat alone, tracing the lines of her locket, whispering the names of her family, and promising herself that she would survive, no matter what. And in the midst of this fear and uncertainty, Emma noticed something she could not ignore. Tay, the man who had brought her here, began to show small gestures that were human, kind, and unexpectedly protective. A hand offered to guide her along a rocky path, a nod of encouragement when she learned a new task, a quiet presence when she felt afraid. Emma could not yet understand the depth of her feelings, but a seed of trust, small and fragile, had begun to grow. It was a strange mix of emotions: fear, hope, resentment, curiosity, and something else she did not yet have a name for. She was no longer the naive girl who had left her village. She was learning, observing, surviving, and beginning to see a new world in ways she had never imagined. Emma knew her journey had only just begun. The life she had been thrust into was full of challenges, but it was also full of possibilities. And though she did not yet know it, her experiences here, her struggles, and the people she would meet, including Tay, would shape her in ways that would change her forever. As the sun set over the distant hills, Emma sat by the fire, feeling the warmth on her face and the cool air on her hands. She took a deep breath, holding onto a quiet determination. She did not yet know what the future held, but she promised herself that she would face it with courage, patience, and an open heart. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the first stirrings of a life she had never imagined, one that would test her, challenge her, and ultimately transform her. The days passed slowly for Emma, each one blending into the next, filled with tasks she had never imagined doing in her old life. She rose before dawn, the cold morning air biting at her skin, and learned to help with chores around the lodge. She carried water from the nearby stream, gathered firewood, and assisted in preparing food. Each task was a lesson in patience and endurance, and though her body ached and her mind often felt overwhelmed, Emma found a strange sense of purpose in these routines. They were demanding, yes, but they kept her mind occupied, leaving less room for the fears that gnawed at her in the quiet moments. The tribe, at first distant and wary, began to accept her presence. Emma observed carefully, noting the rhythms of their life. She watched the women weave intricate patterns into cloth, learning slowly how to mimic their movements. She listened to the men as they repaired tools and hunted, trying to understand their methods. At first, every motion felt foreign, every custom strange, but gradually, Emma began to see the logic behind it all. There was a beauty in the simplicity of their way of life, a respect for nature, for each other, and for the land that her village had never taught her. Tay remained a constant figure in her life, always present but not overbearing. He did not rush her or demand obedience, yet he observed everything she did with a quiet intensity that made her both nervous and curious. Emma could not deny that she was beginning to understand him, in ways she had not anticipated. There was a strictness to his demeanor, yes, but also a gentleness that emerged in small, unexpected ways. A hand offered to steady her on uneven ground, a nod of approval when she completed a task correctly, a rare, fleeting smile when she accomplished something new. At first, Emma resisted any thought of warmth toward him. He had brought her here after all, and though he had not been cruel, she could not forget that her life had been taken from her. She had lost her family, her home, her freedom. To feel gratitude or affection toward him felt like a betrayal of everything she had lost. And yet, as the days turned into weeks, she noticed the ways in which he protected her. He ensured she was never left alone in dangerous situations, guided her through the unfamiliar terrain, and taught her how to navigate the unpredictable rhythms of tribal life. One morning, after a long night of rain, Emma ventured out to collect water from the stream. The path was slippery and the river swelled from the recent storm. She slipped, almost losing her footing, and Tay appeared beside her without her noticing. He caught her arm firmly but gently, preventing a fall that could have been dangerous. For a moment, Emma looked up into his eyes and saw concern, a genuine human concern that unsettled her. She pulled her arm back quickly, not knowing what to say, but the memory of his steadiness lingered in her mind long after. As she learned the daily tasks, Emma also began to notice the subtler rhythms of tribal life, the way the children played, the songs the women sang while working, the stories the elders told by the fire. She began to mimic the songs, clumsily at first, and was met with smiles and laughter. She learned the dances, the gestures, and even the ways to tend small gardens. Each day brought new lessons, each lesson a small victory that slowly built her confidence. She was learning to survive, yes, but also to live within a community that was not her own, to find a place for herself without losing her sense of who she was. Even as Emma adapted, she could not escape the nights. When the campfire burned low and the stars stretched across the sky like a blanket of diamonds, she often found herself thinking of her family. She missed her parents' voices, the warmth of her brother's laugh, the comfort of the small room she had called her own. Tears came unbidden, and she would clutch the locket her mother had given her, pressing it to her chest, whispering silent promises that she would survive, that she would one day see them again. It was during one of these quiet nights that Emma began to notice Tay in a different light. He would sit near her, not intruding, but close enough to offer a sense of protection. He never asked for thanks, never demanded attention, yet his presence was comforting in a way she could not explain. Slowly, she began to speak to him in the few words she had learned in his language, and he responded patiently, correcting her gently, never mocking her mistakes. It was in these small interactions that trust began to grow, trust, not complete yet, but enough to start breaking the walls of fear she had built around her heart. A turning point came one afternoon during a hunting expedition. Emma had insisted on accompanying the men, eager to learn and determined not to appear weak. The forest was dense, the sounds of birds and wind masking the subtle movements of prey. Emma struggled to follow the rhythm, her steps clumsy, her senses untrained. Tay stayed close, whispering guidance, pointing out tracks and teaching her the patience required to wait, to observe, to anticipate. Hours passed, and just as her frustration peaked, she witnessed a small miracle, a deer graceful and silent moving through the trees. Tay nodded at her, a gesture of approval and shared triumph. Emma felt a thrill of pride, a sense of accomplishment she had never known before. For the first time, she saw herself not just as a guest, but as a participant, as someone who could belong here. With each passing day, Emma's understanding of Tay deepened. She began to notice the small details, the way he respected the elders, the way he guided the younger men and women, the way he balanced strength with kindness. There were moments when she caught him staring into the distance, his expression thoughtful, almost vulnerable. She realized that beneath his commanding presence was a man who carried responsibilities, fears, and emotions that he did not reveal easily. Slowly, she began to see him as more than just the man who had brought her here. She began to see him as a person, complex and human, someone she might one day understand fully. Emma also discovered that the tribe, while strict, was not unkind. There were lessons in every task, stories behind every tradition, and purpose in every rule. She learned to respect the land, to move quietly, to observe patterns in nature. She learned that patience was not just a virtue, but a necessity, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. With each lesson, her confidence grew, and the fear that had once dominated her heart began to make room for something else, a cautious curiosity, a willingness to learn, and a tentative trust in the people around her. Despite these small victories, Emma's heart remained heavy. She missed her family more than ever, and she feared that she would never return to them. But in Tay's presence, she felt a strange, comforting steadiness. He never pressed her to speak of her past, never forced her to share her pain, but his silence was not cold. It was a recognition of her suffering, a space for her to heal at her own pace. One evening, during a quiet walk along the riverbank, Emma spoke softly to him, her words halting, her voice trembling. She spoke of her village, of her parents, of the life she had lost. Tay listened attentively, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished, he placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance, and for the first time, Emma felt that she was not alone. There was someone here who understood, someone who respected her pain, someone who, despite everything, had not abandoned her to fear. It was in these moments that Emma began to feel the stirrings of something new. She did not yet understand it fully. It was not yet love, not yet friendship, but a fragile connection built on shared experiences, quiet gestures, and mutual respect. She began to notice the way Tay's presence steadied her, how his guidance allowed her to navigate the challenges she had once thought insurmountable. And though she was careful not to admit it even to herself, a small seed of admiration and trust had taken root in her heart. Life continued in this delicate balance of fear, adaptation, and cautious trust. Emma learned to perform the daily tasks with more confidence, to speak in the language of the tribe with growing fluency, and to observe the subtle signals of respect and hierarchy that governed their society. Each day brought new challenges, but also small victories, successful tasks, shared laughter, moments of quiet understanding. And with each passing day, the walls of fear that had once trapped her began to crumble, replaced by a growing awareness that she could survive, adapt, and even find moments of happiness in this strange, new world. By the end of her second month, Emma was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived in the tribe. She had learned to move with purpose, to communicate with gestures and words, to anticipate challenges and navigate them with a growing sense of confidence. She had seen Tay in countless situations, observed his leadership, and begun to understand the complexity of his character. And though she still missed her family deeply, she had begun to find a place for herself here, a small space where fear and hope coexisted, where trust and caution balanced each other delicately. Emma knew that the journey ahead would be long and uncertain. She knew there would be trials, moments of doubt, and challenges she could not yet imagine. But she also knew that she was no longer alone, and that she had begun to form connections that, in time, might grow into something deeper and more enduring. And though she did not yet understand the full nature of her feelings, she sensed that her relationship with Tay would be central to the path that lay before her, a path filled with both hardship and hope, fear and discovery, loss and the possibility of something she had never dared to imagine. As the months passed, Emma's life with the tribe became more familiar, yet no less challenging. Every day brought new lessons, and every experience tested her patience, courage, and determination. She had learned the daily routines, tending to the garden, helping with cooking, assisting in making tools, and participating in the small ceremonies that marked the rhythm of the tribe's life. Yet she knew that to truly belong, she would have to understand more than the tasks. She would have to understand the people, their values, and the man who had come to occupy her thoughts more than she cared to admit. Tay's presence was a constant in her life, steady and reliable. Emma had come to recognize his quiet patterns, how he rose before dawn, how he observed the land with a careful eye, and how he listened to every sound in the environment as though it were a language. She had watched him guide the younger men, not with harshness but with authority born of experience. She had seen him intervene only when necessary, allowing others to learn from their mistakes, but stepping in decisively when danger threatened. Over time, she began to understand that Tay's strength was not only in his physical ability, but in his patience, his wisdom, and his ability to see beyond the immediate moment. Emma herself had grown stronger. She no longer stumbled over simple tasks, and she had learned to anticipate challenges before they arose. She could move quietly through the woods, gather herbs without disturbing the wildlife, and even assist in hunting preparations. The tribe had started to accept her more fully, recognizing her efforts and her willingness to learn. Children would sometimes follow her, curious about the strange girl who had come from another world, and she found herself smiling more often, even laughing when they played games she could barely understand but enjoyed immensely. Despite these improvements, Emma's heart remained cautious. She could not forget the life she had left behind, nor the family she missed dearly. Letters were impossible, and the distance felt like an unbridgeable chasm. Yet she also could not ignore the growing feelings she had toward Tay. It began with small observations, the care in his gestures, the attention he paid to her learning, the quiet protection he provided. Then came moments of shared experience, where they faced challenges together and discovered the trust and reliance that came from navigating them as a team. One afternoon, a sudden storm struck while Emma and Tay were collecting firewood. The wind tore through the trees, and heavy rain quickly soaked the ground. Emma struggled to maintain her footing on the slippery path, her arms full of wood, when she lost her balance. Tay was immediately there, catching her and steadying her before she fell. They both laughed nervously, drenched and shaking, but the laughter was not just relief, it was a connection. Emma realized, with a mix of surprise and warmth, that she felt safer with him than she had with anyone in a long time. This growing closeness was not always easy for Emma to understand. She wrestled with guilt over the feelings that emerged, questioning whether it was wrong to feel trust, admiration, and even something like affection toward the man who had been her captor. Yet the moments of shared experience, the quiet conversations by the fire, and the unspoken understanding that grew between them could not be denied. Slowly, Emma came to accept that human bonds were complex and could form even in the most unlikely circumstances. The tribe faced its own challenges during this time. A neighboring group encroached upon their lands, bringing tension and the need for vigilance. Tay took on a leadership role, coordinating efforts to protect the community while minimizing conflict. Emma observed him in these moments and gained a new appreciation for his strength. He remained calm and composed even in the face of danger, thinking strategically and acting decisively. She began to understand that leadership was not about power or dominance, but about responsibility, courage, and the willingness to place the community's needs above personal comfort. Emma also began to contribute more actively during these crises. She learned to notice signs in the environment that indicated approaching danger: broken branches, distant sounds, changes in animal behavior. She helped relay messages within the tribe, assisted in preparing supplies, and even comforted children who were frightened by the heightened tension. Through these actions, she began to see herself as more than just a guest. She was a part of the tribe, contributing in ways that mattered. One evening, as the tension from the neighboring group grew, Tay invited Emma to sit with him near the river. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the water. They spoke quietly, not of strategy or duty, but of memories of places they had known, of small joys and past experiences. Emma shared stories of her village, of her family, and of the life she had left behind. Tay listened intently, occasionally nodding, sometimes asking questions that showed a curiosity and respect for her past. In return, Tay shared parts of his life as well, not in great detail, but in glimpses that allowed Emma to understand him better. He spoke of his childhood, of the lessons his elders had taught him, of the responsibilities he carried for his people. Emma realized that beneath his strong exterior was a man shaped by challenges, by responsibility, and by the weight of leadership. She felt a growing admiration for him, tempered by a deepening emotional connection that she could not yet fully name. The bond between them strengthened further through shared hardships. One day, while out checking traps in the forest, Emma became caught in a sudden landslide. Rocks tumbled around her, and she struggled to maintain her balance. Tay reacted instantly, pulling her to safety with a strength and decisiveness that left her breathless. In the aftermath, as they both caught their breath, Emma felt a surge of gratitude and trust. She realized that she could rely on him completely, that he would protect her without hesitation, and that she, in turn, could contribute to their survival by staying calm and following his guidance. As trust grew, so did understanding. Emma began to anticipate Tay's moods, his patterns, his methods of communication. She noticed when he was concerned, when he was pleased, when he was quietly contemplative. Likewise, Tay began to notice her strengths, the way she adapted to new challenges, her growing resilience, and her ability to think quickly under pressure. Their interactions became less formal, more personal, yet still grounded in respect and mutual reliance. Emma also started to observe the subtle ways in which Tay cared for the tribe. He was always the first to rise and the last to rest, ensuring that everyone had what they needed, that the young were safe, and that traditions were upheld. He did not seek recognition or praise, yet his leadership was evident in the loyalty and respect he inspired. Emma began to understand that true strength was not only physical, but moral, emotional, and deeply connected to the welfare of others. During this period, Emma found moments of quiet joy. She laughed with children, learned new songs from the women, and even managed to catch a fish for the first time using the techniques Tay had taught her. Each small success brought her a sense of accomplishment and belonging. She realized that life, even in this strange and challenging environment, could be full of beauty and satisfaction. She began to feel a deeper connection to the land, to the people, and to Tay himself, a connection built not on possession, but on shared experience, respect, and trust. As the seasons changed, so too did Emma's perspective. She no longer viewed the tribe as alien or intimidating, but as a community with its own wisdom and ways of living. She began to see herself as a participant rather than an outsider, contributing meaningfully to daily life and the collective well-being of the group. And as her understanding grew, so did her feelings for Tay. What had begun as cautious trust evolved into admiration, and admiration into something more profound, something that made her heart beat faster when he was near, that made her think of him in quiet moments, and that slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to shape her understanding of love. The realization was both exciting and frightening. Emma had always believed that love was something gentle and easy, something she could control. But what she felt for Tay was different. It was complicated, rooted in shared struggle, mutual respect, and deep understanding. She knew that it could not be forced or rushed, but she also knew that it could not be ignored. And as Tay continued to show her patience, guidance, and kindness, Emma began to allow herself to accept that her feelings were real, that they were a natural response to the bond they had formed. One evening, during a quiet celebration of the harvest, Emma and Tay found themselves alone near the edge of the river. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of autumn leaves and the soft murmur of flowing water. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than tension. Tay placed a hand gently on Emma's arm, a simple gesture of connection that spoke volumes. In that moment, Emma realized that she no longer feared him, nor did she resist the feelings that had developed in her heart. She felt a sense of belonging, of trust, and of a bond that had been forged through shared experience, respect, and the quiet strength of their connection. By the end of this chapter of her life, Emma had transformed in ways she could not have imagined. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable. She had learned to navigate a world entirely different from the one she had known, and she had begun to understand the complexity of human emotions, relationships, and trust. Most importantly, she had discovered that love could emerge even in the most unexpected circumstances. A love that was patient, respectful, and enduring, one that would shape her path and define her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. Time passed, and Emma had grown into her life with the tribe. She was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived months ago, unsure of her place or purpose. She had learned the language, the customs, and the ways of the land. She could move through the forest with confidence, gather food, care for the animals, and participate in ceremonies with a sense of belonging. The tribe respected her now, not just as someone who had learned quickly, but as someone who had earned her place among them through patience, courage, and determination. Yet her heart had changed even more than her abilities. The connection she shared with Tay had deepened into something that neither of them could ignore. What had started as cautious trust and admiration had evolved into a bond built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding of each other's fears and strengths. They had faced challenges together, storms, danger in the forest, and threats from neighboring groups, and in every challenge they had learned to rely on each other completely. Emma realized now that she had come to love him, not only for his strength and guidance but for the quiet kindness he had shown her, the patience he had displayed, and the respect he had given her as a person. Tay, too, had changed. He had never sought this connection, never allowed himself to feel deeply for anyone, but Emma had broken through the walls he had built around his heart. He admired her courage, her intelligence, and the way she adapted to the world he knew so well. He had watched her grow from a frightened girl into a capable young woman, and with each passing day, his respect and affection for her had grown. There was a quiet tenderness in his eyes when he looked at her, a softness that contrasted with his commanding presence. And though neither of them spoke of it openly at first, the bond between them was undeniable. Life in the tribe continued with its rhythms, but Emma and Tay found ways to be together in moments that felt private, sacred, and comforting. They would walk together along the riverbank, sharing stories of their pasts and hopes for the future. They would sit near the fire after long days, speaking quietly, laughing softly, or simply enjoying the silence. In these moments there was no fear, no judgment, no need for pretense. There was only understanding and trust. One day, the tribe faced a challenge that would test their bond like never before. A nearby settlement had begun to encroach on their land, cutting down trees and hunting animals that the tribe relied on for food. Tay took on the responsibility of protecting the community, organizing patrols and devising strategies to ensure the safety of the tribe. Emma insisted on helping, determined to contribute in any way she could. She used the skills she had learned, observing patterns, gathering information, and assisting in preparations. Together, they worked tirelessly, side by side, relying on each other's judgment and strength. During this time, Emma saw another side of Tay. He was not just strong or wise. He was compassionate, patient, and deeply committed to the well-being of his people. He did not act recklessly or out of anger. He acted with care, planning every move carefully to avoid unnecessary harm. Emma realized that his leadership was rooted in love for his people, and perhaps in a quiet, unspoken way, love for her. She felt proud to stand beside him, to contribute to the community, and to be recognized as someone whose presence mattered. The days were long and exhausting, but the challenges they faced brought them closer. Emma and Tay learned to communicate without words, understanding each other's intentions and thoughts through gestures, glances, and shared experience. Their connection became a source of strength, not just for themselves, but for the tribe. When fear or doubt threatened to overwhelm the others, Emma and Tay stood as examples of courage, resilience, and unwavering trust. One evening, after the threat had passed and the tribe was safe, Emma and Tay found themselves alone once again by the river. The sky was painted with the soft colors of twilight, and the water reflected the fading light. They spoke little, but the silence was full of meaning. Tay reached out and took Emma's hand in his, a simple yet profound gesture that spoke of connection, trust, and a shared understanding of all they had endured together. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Over time, their bond grew even stronger. They shared stories of their childhoods, laughed at small mistakes, and comforted each other in moments of fear or sadness. Emma taught Tay things from her past, small traditions from her village that brought smiles and curiosity, while Tay shared his own knowledge, his connection to the land, and the values of his tribe. They became partners in every sense, supporting each other, learning from each other, and finding joy in shared experiences. As seasons changed, Emma's confidence and skills grew, and she began to take on responsibilities that had once seemed impossible. She helped teach younger members of the tribe, assisted in planning important ceremonies, and even guided visitors who came seeking help or understanding. Through these actions, she earned respect not just from Tay, but from the entire community. She was no longer the outsider. She was a vital part of the tribe, someone whose presence brought value and stability. And through it all, the love between Emma and Tay continued to flourish. It was a love not born of convenience or ease, but of shared trials, mutual respect, and unwavering trust. They had seen each other at their weakest, supported each other through fear and uncertainty, and celebrated victories together. Their bond was resilient because it had been forged in fire, tempered by patience, and nurtured by understanding. One day, as the sun rose over the mountains, casting golden light over the valley, Tay took Emma to a quiet place near the cliffs, a spot he had cherished since childhood. They stood together, looking out over the land that had shaped them both in different ways. Tay spoke softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He expressed his admiration for her courage, his gratitude for her presence in his life, and his desire to continue this journey together. Emma, her eyes shining with tears, reciprocated, sharing her own feelings of love, respect, and commitment. In that moment, there was no need for formalities or words beyond what their hearts expressed. The tribe celebrated the bond between them in its own way. There were songs, dances, and stories that honored their connection, not as a possession of one another, but as a recognition of their partnership, trust, and mutual respect. Emma and Tay stood together, side by side, surrounded by people who had come to see them as leaders, partners, and symbols of courage and resilience. It was a celebration not just of love, but of life, community, and the power of human connection. As the years went by, Emma and Tay faced challenges together, as any life would demand. There were times of hardship, illness, and uncertainty, but through it all, their bond remained steadfast. Emma's love for Tay deepened with every shared experience, every act of kindness, and every challenge overcome. Tay's affection and admiration for Emma grew as he witnessed her courage, intelligence, and unwavering spirit. They became inseparable, not through obligation or circumstance, but through a love that had been tested and proven true. Emma often reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the uncertainty, the loss of her old life. And yet, she knew that every step had led her to a life she could never have imagined. She had discovered strength within herself, a resilience she had never known, and a love that was patient, enduring, and unbreakable. She had found a home in a place that had once seemed foreign, a family in people who had once been strangers, and a partner in a man who had once been simply her captor, now the love of her life. In quiet moments, when the wind rustled through the trees or the sun set over the distant hills, Emma would sit with Tay and feel the warmth of his hand, the steady beat of his heart, and the unspoken promise of lifelong partnership. She understood now that love was not always simple or easy, but it was worth every challenge, every moment of fear, every hardship endured. It was a bond that could withstand trials, flourish in understanding, and grow stronger with time. And so, Emma and Tay continued their life together, side by side, facing each day with courage, love, and respect. They laughed, worked, and celebrated together. They taught and learned from one another. And in the end, they created a life that was not defined by circumstance, but by the choices they made, the bond they nurtured, and the love that neither time nor challenge could ever take away. Through everything, Emma remained grateful for the journey she had endured, the hardships, the lessons, and the growth. She had learned that life could bring unexpected turns, but with courage, trust, and love, it could also bring joy, purpose, and a connection that would last a lifetime. And as she looked at Tay, she knew that the love they shared was something rare, precious, and eternal, a love that neither time nor fate could ever let go.